there, and welcome once again to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Meyers. We're here every week meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues. And glad you're with us today, and we're going to talk about something that is pretty much centered on Tulsa, but I think the whole state's paying attention and thinking this is long overdue.
Yes, we wanted to do a show on the Tulsa Race Massacre, and we thought from a scheduling standpoint it would be better to try to do it with Phil Armstrong, the project director there at the commission, after the activities were complete, and he could give kind of a summary of what went on and what was accomplished and who attended and all that sort of thing. So we are really pleased to have Phil Armstrong join us today to talk to you about the Tulsa Race Massacre Commission.
And we'll be right back. That's coming up on The Verdict.
Right now, 6 feet can feel like a long ways away. But from 6 feet, we can still smile at each other. From our doorways and our stairways, from opposite sides of the street and opposite sides of the country. Through fear and frustrations, we can remind each other that we are still here for each other. Because we can still smile at each other. And we're not going anywhere.
One of my first experiences working in TV, I was a production assistant. I was like, ask me to do anything and I'll do it. I'm just here to work hard. And so I think that eagerness goes a long way. My name is Ezekiel Walker. I am a TV producer in Los Angeles, and I am Chickasaw. As a kid, I saw the opportunity behind the lens to capture great stories. And I feel as though that's my purpose in life. And really close to my heart is the stories of my own people. There's a need to represent Native Americans and minorities in a genuine way. The Chickasaw Nation started with strong ancestors. It started with survivors. I have a responsibility to not let that be in vain, but to work hard and to keep moving forward and to keep conquering.
See more stories about the Chickasaw people at profilesofanation.com.
With Kent Meyers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
As we talked about in the open, our guest today is Phil Armstrong, the project director for the Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission. Phil is a native of Ohio, but thank goodness we've stolen him away from Ohio the last 24 years as he's been living in Tulsa. He did his undergraduate work at Central State University at Wilberforce, Ohio, got his master's degree at the University of Akron. In Tulsa, he's been involved in many activities, and we'll be talking about a number of them on the show. He's been an adjunct professor at Tulsa Tech, teaching. He's been a lecturer on leadership. He's been involved in many charitable and civic causes as well while he's been in Tulsa. And we're really glad to get him on the show. I know he's a really busy guy, and we caught him when we could. Phil, welcome. Glad to have you.
Yeah.
Great. I'm grateful to be here, and thank you for the opportunity.
Sure. Phil, the recent 100-year anniversary took place. Tell us what we missed if we weren't there in Tulsa.
Well, quite candidly, it really just cannot be summed up in the time that we have here. 100 years of this history, and as I'm sure you all are well aware, and now, quite honestly, the world, and to some degree, is aware of this horrific moment in American history, in Tulsa's history, that was denied so many generations afterwards of being made aware of it. Number one, but then number two, not just focusing on this tragedy, on the massacre, but the fact that so many people are just now being awakened to what the Oklahoma Territory represented for African Americans at the turn of the century, a respite, if you will, a paradise for Black citizens in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, and 90s that were looking for a place where they could find their American dream, their fame, their fortune, to own land, to have the freedom to build what they wanted to build without any persecution from the post-racial realities of the South. And it's just amazing that the Oklahoma Territory at that time was that place. And that, again, history books have denied this, or for whatever reason. Here we are in 2021, and people are just now finding out just how incredible Oklahoma was for Native Americans, for Black Americans specifically. And then that, all of that led to, the creation of Greenwood, and the story goes on from there. But what we experienced during the Centennial was just quite miraculous, if you will. Black citizens, white citizens, citizens from all around the country, and from the virtual capabilities that we have now because of the pandemic and investments in technology. Literally, the world was tuned in to what was going on in Oklahoma, and that this is more so about the next 100 years, not continually embedding ourselves in the past, but acknowledging what took place, being aware of it, learning from it, and then, okay, where do we go from here? How do we really get on this road to racial harmony, racial reconciliation, by using this past as a backdrop of what can happen in communities all over the country? I believe race relations in America, ground zero is Tulsa, Oklahoma, Greenwood, what took place 100 years ago. No other community in the United States can say that Americans dropped incendiary devices, bomb-like devices, on their fellow Americans and destroyed an entire community based upon race. And at the time, rampant white supremacy that was taking place at that time. No one has that story, that particular narrative. And to use that and to say 100 years later, we are going to heal from this. We are going to come together, and we are going to find ways, regardless of politics, regardless of who you voted for, who you didn't vote for, or what part of town you live in. This happened in American history, in Tulsa's history. It impacted Black citizens and white citizens. We're still reeling from the consequences of this being hidden for so many years, but we have a hope. We have a bright future ahead of us. And it starts here with Greenwood, and I believe it'll permeate throughout the entire nation. The next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, I believe people will stop and say, something began to change in the United States. There's something that began where people started having honest conversations, that people started putting politics aside, and we started making some true inroads into racial harmony and what keeps us still divided. And I think people are going to say 2021 in Tulsa began a trajectory in the United States. And I believe, generations from now, people will say, that the next 100 years definitely will not look like the previous 100 years.
Well, Phil, I can just give you my personal comment that that's a remarkably positive and uplifting approach that you've just outlined, and we thank you for doing that. It meant a lot to me. I want to tell you that growing up in Oklahoma City, I went through public schools, grade school, junior high school, and then the University of Oklahoma, and never once did I hear a thing about the Tulsa Race Massacre. In history classes, in Oklahoma history classes, I never heard about it until a few years before your celebration and the commemoration of the anniversary. And I've watched several documentaries about it and just think I just can't hardly believe this happened in Oklahoma, but it did. Well, enough of that. Let me ask you this. Why was the commission formed? What was the purpose of forming the Centennial Commission?
So, excellent question. And if you give me a couple of minutes, I want to really explain to your audience the role of this commission. And let me address this. This was not a state-appointed entity. It was not a governmental function whatsoever. This really came about in 2015. State Senator Kevin Matthews, at the time, he was only one of two African Americans even serving in the state Senate. And at that time, you know, Oklahoma was thinking about commemorating the 25th anniversary of the Oklahoma bombing for 2019. And they began having in-depth discussions. What would that look like? We need to commemorate this. 25 years is about to happen upon us. And they were using language like one of the worst cases of domestic terrorism that ever took place in the United States and Oklahoma. And Senator Matthews began then interjecting the fact that, well, I hope you understand that in 6 years, we're about to come upon the 100th anniversary of the worst case of domestic terrorism that ever took place on United States soil, where Americans dropped bombs on other Americans right here in Tulsa, and no one's making any plans for commemoration for that. And of course, the room drew eerily silent, and many discussions started happening as a result. If we're going to commemorate 25 years of that event, then who are we not to take a moment to recognize that we need to do something for this 100? What will the world say after 100 years? What's different in Greenwood and Tulsa? And that began conversations. That opened up Senate Bill 17, opening a revolving historical fund of $1.5 million that the state approved and placed at the Oklahoma Historical Society. And Senator Kevin Matthews came back to Tulsa and said, hey, people are ready to talk about this, and started having one-on-one conversations with groups, with committee members, with Greenwood Cultural Center, with John Hope Franklin Center members and members of the community. And it just grew and grew from there, and started having meetings. And then it was, you know, what will we call ourselves? And the name, the Centennial Commission, was formed. So it didn't have any formal designation from the state, but it was really a community grassroots-led organization that called itself the commission, which points to the first commission that some people don't even realize existed, and that was the Oklahoma State Appointed Commission, that it was established from 1997 to 2001, a 5-year state-appointed, taxpayer-funded commission report to study the Tulsa Race Riot, as they called it back then. It was led by Bob Blackburn, you know, just retired recently from being the executive director of the Oklahoma Historical Society, and you know, for 5 years they did an exhaustive research on the damages that were done, the financial damages, the witness and eyewitness accounts that are now held at the Oklahoma Historical Society. A 200-page document that at the end of 5 years was submitted back to the state, and it offered. This was a committee full of Republicans, Democrats, Tulsa citizens, Oklahoma City citizens, and they offered to the state, you were complicit in this. The Oklahoma National Guard, the Tulsa Police Department, the leadership of Tulsa, you were complicit in what took place, and it offered 5 specific recommendations for reparations.
Phil, let me interject and get us to our first break, and we'll be back and allow you to continue. Phil Armstrong is our guest. We're discussing the Tulsa Race Massacre and the recent 100th year remembrance. We'll be right back.
OU Law has a history and heritage that are unparalleled. At the University of Oklahoma College of Law, we empower our students to pursue the career of their dreams. We have the highest U.S. News ranking ever achieved by an Oklahoma law school. We are the first law school in the country to launch a college-wide digital initiative. And this year, our competition teams rank number 2 in the nation. OU Law, generations of excellence, limitless possibilities.
When I came to work for the ODVA, I started realizing the opportunity to take care of veterans. It's a powerful thing when you realize that you are taking care of people that made history.
Working here is a calling. It's really, really important that they don't just come here to exist. We want to give them meaning to their lives. We try to make life happy and meaningful and fulfilled for our veterans.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Our guest this week is Phil Armstrong. He was very much involved in the recent 100th year anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. And when we broke, Phil, you were explaining a state commissioned report that came out, nearly 20 years ago. What happened to that report?
So that report and the 5 specific recommendations, one of being actual monetary payments made to those survivors that were living at that time. There were about 18 to 20 of them, and that the state and the governmental bodies owed them that, and establishment of an economic empowerment zone to reinvigorate the business district of Greenwood, to scholarships, but 5 specific recommendations. And as you just indicated, 20 years later, here we are, the 20th anniversary of that report, and not even one of those recommendations have ever even had any policy initiative or any follow through by the state or the city. And so the work of the commission really is to highlight since this has been able to be hidden for so long, and it's literally where we are, no one really knows about this history. And so what could the commission do to basically elevate this history? Not just the massacre, but again, the rich history of Greenwood and Black citizens of Oklahoma, and what happens to a community when it's destroyed through, in 1921, the climate, the racial climate at the time, to the 1960s when urban renewal came in and destroyed Greenwood a second time with the building of I-244. And how are we still dealing with these consequences of these activities and these actions against an entire community today? And so Greenwood Rising History Center, the projects that we've worked on, the educational curriculum with the state, the economic initiatives that we are beginning to work through with the community and with the city, all of this elevates this history, and it really brings people to the table to say, yes, this was horrible, this was horrific, but we are now coming together. It's 100 years late, but the timing really has a lot to do with where we are as a country, as a nation, and even as a community, to say, enough of hiding this, enough of trying to sweep this under the rug and say that was a long time ago. Let's not even talk about it anymore. We have people from all over the community that are saying we want to come together and work on ways to try to find a point where what once was can be again. And that's really what's happening. It's just the enlightenment and education of everyone on this history and how do we correct some of the damages that were caused back then.
Phil, I noticed from following the activities that there were 3 living survivors living in Tulsa, I guess now. Can you talk about your affiliation with them, what your experiences were with them, what you learned from them?
So the overall work of the commission was to invite the entire community. And we did that in 2015, 16, 17, and 18. And a lot of this work, really, it's difficult to tell so many people what you're working on, other than at that time, we didn't have any news coverage. We were just having small community meetings and reaching out, putting things in the paper as we would meet with the community and have feedback sessions and hear from the community and put plans forward. I mean, back then, no one was talking about building a history center, but that's what's developed over time. So having direct communication with the living survivors, we were not even made aware of them until 2019, when a lot of work was being done by an organization called Justice for Greenwood, is when really their history and their lives really started coming to the surface. We were working extensively with the entire community, which direct descendants, living and known direct descendants that we were aware of and made aware of by working with the John Hope Franklin Center and Greenwood Culture Center, who had those contacts with those individuals. And then word of mouth, even on the commission, we had several people who were direct descendants. But because of this history, because of the as they call it, the diaspora of so many people that left Oklahoma, Black citizens, even they do not know who the others are. They might have contact with one, maybe another group, but the overall, I mean, there were 6,000 people who left Oklahoma after 1921 to never return again. So getting in touch with people, getting in touch with groups, it's a long process. It's still being worked through. So to know that there were survivors and it's still here, and that we can actually elevate this history through the Greenwood Rising History Series, I think it acknowledges and recognizes them specifically. It acknowledges and recognizes the descendants and direct descendants who are still alive. And more importantly, it acknowledges what the first commission did. And that this history and this history center, really, we are following through on those witness statements of the survivors from the 1997 to 2001, when Eddie Faye Gates, who did a lot of the recordings of those who were living survivors back then. The constant theme in those witness statements was, we want people to know our story. We want someone to tell our story. And so we are really fulfilling the wishes of the survivors from the 1997 to 2001 report. We finally are here telling their story and what was utilized in that commission report. And so overall, contact with survivors living and past is what our focus and intention has been to elevate this history forward.
So, Phil, what's next for you? What will you be working on in regard to these issues going forward?
So the commission actually will have completed its projects in the next couple of weeks. We'll have a sunsetting ceremony, and I will transition into the role of interim executive director for Greenwood Rising Black Wall Street History Center, and we'll see what the next 6 months and the next year has for me, in store for me. But I've teased our commission. I said I'm out of a job here in about a couple of weeks. So, but I'm glad that they offered me the interim director position.
Talk a little bit about the Greenwood Rising History Center. Where is it? Is it in existence? Is it still on the drawing board? What's its status?
Yeah, so we actually dedicated the building and opened it up actually Wednesday as a limited community preview. We wanted the first 10 days to give the community the opportunity to come see it. As we are about 98% done with construction. What's left is the exterior. We have a lot of sidewalk and beautification and landscaping that needs to be done, but we wanted it to be ready for the centennial. And so last Wednesday, we actually dedicated it, and the first few hours, it was exclusively for the North Tulsa community, North Tulsa leaders, descendants, survivors, descendant families. The first people to see it were those, and for the first few days, we were open to let them see it on a limited basis. This week, the overall Tulsa community, everyone can come in and see it before we'll close down for the remainder of the month of June and have a grand opening for all the public to come see it in July the 3rd, weekend of July the 3rd. That's a Saturday, and we'll have a grand opening at that moment. Phil,
about 15 or 30 seconds left. Is there a book that's out there that our viewers could read that you're satisfied delivers a good message and a more complete tale of everything you've discussed today?
Excellent question. I will offer two books, and they're from mentor, personal friend, and the lead curator for Greenwood Rising, Hannibal B. Johnson, 2 books. The book he wrote 20 years ago, Black Wall Street, and it's by the title, Hannibal B. Johnson, Black Wall Street, and then the book he released last year by Hannibal Johnson, Tulsa 100. It's basically a recapping of the last 100 years and offers solutions of where we go from here, what the next 100 years look like.
Phil Armstrong's been our guest. Phil, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Kent and I'll have a final word when we get back.
It used to be okay in teachers' lounges. It used to be okay in maternity wards. It was okay in sporting arenas, college campuses, and office spaces. But now that we understand the deadly dangers of secondhand smoke, that's not okay anymore. So why is it okay that thousands of employees are exposed to it every day at work? Bottom line, it's not okay. Let's protect hardworking Oklahomans. Join the fight at stopswithme.com.
All children deserve a life of hope and love. but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be Mom and Dad to me.
I think for us, once we got started and we began to see the tremendous need just within our state, it really was just a calling for us. The blessings far outweigh any obstacles that we've faced.
You will always be Mom and Dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
Armstrong's been a busy guy.
Well, he has indeed. He's had a lot to do this last year, and it doesn't look like it's going to slow down anytime soon. There's still a lot more to do. What a good representative Phil Armstrong is to tell the story about what went on in Tulsa 100 years ago and how it was basically ignored until recently, and what is going to arise out of it. I love the phrase, Greenwood Rising. That is a very positive message that I think all of us can appreciate.
Phil mentioned a book, Black Wall Street Experience. Oh, that's different. The book was Hannibal B. Johnson's Black Wall Street 100. It's available on Amazon. We have a website for you to check out, tulsa2021.org, and we have a website, theverdict.tv. That's going to do it for this week's show. Thanks very much. We'll see you next time.